it going?
Hey, Dr.
Por favor. Onitin por that coach. Nice to meet you, Dr. Hawk.
Very nice to meet both of you.
And how are things on the East Coast, Dr. Siddiqui?
I mean, it's okay. It's like it's raining a lot today, so it's kind of nice to be indoors. I think last time the weather was really nice, so I wish I could have done this outdoors, but there was no Wi-Fi outside, so it just worked better in a conference room. But it's raining now. What about you guys?
There's a heat wave on the West Coast for sure. So It's a hot day.
I feel like a heat wave really just happens in LA, but you guys are in the Pacific Northwest and San Francisco. What's a heat wave? Like 60 degrees?
90 degrees. It's real. It's real. Not like Bangladesh though. Bangladesh is a whole other ballgame.
Oh my God. I don't know how women keep their hair together in Bangladesh.
The humidity.
Yeah, like at their like tip-top shape, I have no idea how, but good for them. Awesome.
So hi everyone at HerWill. Welcome to episode 2 of Her OBGYN, hosted by HerWill, Women Inspired in Life and Leadership. আশা করি আপনারা সবাই ভালো আছেন। শুরু করার আগে, we want to thank the HerWill platform, their team, Farhana Hassan, for this opportunity. All of us believe that women, when they're informed on their health, can make the best decisions for themselves. And for HerWill to acknowledge and see that vision that we have and give us donate their time and volunteer their platform for us is an incredible honor. We hope that we are contributing some good to our Bangladeshi sisters and mothers and daughters. So similar to you guys, Dr. Siddiqui and Dr. Haq, in what ways do you think HerWill has made an impact on you, and how do you think this platform will help?
Yeah, I love the fact that there is a platform like this exists. I don't know actually how about you, Dr. Hussain, but in my training in Washington, D.C. and in Virginia, I did have a lot of Bangladeshi patients. So being able to like talk with them about like healthcare and their medical care is something that, first of all, I feel like I do need to work on. And it felt really like exhilarating every time I had the opportunity to do that, because it just feels good. It feels like you have a different kind of kinship with a patient that is Bangladeshi, and so to be able to really essentially have that relationship with all of you, it's really nice, and I'm really glad that we have this opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, similarly, my training was on the border on Long Island, so certainly there's a large Bangladeshi, very large South Asian population. And one of the kind of things that I kept noticing was this idea of like, oh, like we didn't really know that like these were potential things or this was a possibility. So I think that that's why this platform is very important. And I think what the two of you are doing and what HerWill is doing is just phenomenal for providing information, for getting this stuff out there.
Exactly. And to sort of echo what both of you said, as I guess we would be called second generation Bangladeshi Americans, oftentimes we feel this void, this need to connect to our roots. And, you know, as physicians, we are the point person for so many family members who give us a call all the time in the middle of the night, depending on what time zone we're in. Hey, Achal, I have this friend in Bangladesh who's going through this, or I have this pain from fibroids, or my friend's going for surgery. What recommendations we're getting in whatever part of the world they're in? Is it good? And so we often end up being these informal consultants for our Bangladeshi family members. And we feel that that's a unique reassurance we can give to our family that we want to extend further to our Bangladeshi female family here, because we are a product of you guys and we want to give back to you. So totally 100% agree with both of you.
So technically I'm first generation, but I agree with you. My parents bore the burden of immigrating here, and it's just
then our first generation as well. I probably incur.
Oh.
What is second generation?
No, I think first generation is first generation is when you're born here, but your parents are born in Bangladesh.
Is that okay? Well, then
look it up. First generation is when the parents' generation, the immigrating generation.
Yeah, that's what I thought too.
Oh, okay.
Semantics.
Yeah, that's good. I want to know.
Yeah, Google it. Google it, Dr. Siddiqui, while we go ahead. So, as Dr. Siddiqui mentioned, Dr. Siddiqui, আমি আজকে একটা important issue নিয়ে কথা বলবো, which is postpartum depression. We took a poll a couple of months ago on OBGYN issues that women wanted to hear about, and postpartum depression was one of the top voted topics. As an OBGYN, I'm seeing pregnant patients all the time. I'm screening for postpartum depression. I take care of women that are affected by postpartum depression. So it's not a norm. I don't find anything stigmatizing, abnormal, or unusual about it. However, আমাদের Bangladeshi culture, এটা নিয়ে কথা বলা হয় না. It's the unfortunate reality, and the three of us recognize this. সেজন্যে we've decided to invite our colleague, Dr. Tahia Haq, who's a psychiatrist, to help supplement this discussion so she can add some of her expertise to the OBGYN discussion to help understand this condition further. Dr. Haq, we are so happy and so thrilled to have you with us. Thank you so much for volunteering your time and to being a guest speaker to our series. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, yeah. So I was born in Bangladesh and I did my undergraduate and medical training at Rutgers in New Jersey. And then I did my psychiatry residency training at Sucker Hillside Hospital in Long Island. And so it's a lot of learning medications, different types of psychotherapy. And really my goal now is to see how I can give back. And, again, like what you said, go back to my roots and figure out how to have that voice and provide all the information that I've learned for so many years and how to share that with others.
Exactly. Thank you. We echo that, and we're very happy that you feel the same way. Dr. Siddiqui, before kind of going into the meat of the topic, can you talk a little bit about the goals of our episode today?
Sure. So just to make it clear to everybody, this is going to be very similar to our last talk, which is, even though we are three healthcare professionals, we are three physicians here talking about a really sensitive topic, and we'd love to be all of your physicians, I promise, but unfortunately today we are not playing the role as your physician. So everything that we say, we want you to take as educational resources, and we really just want to empower you to be able to make the right and best decisions for both your physical and mental health. So please, everything that we say today, talk to your own physician first about before taking any of this to mean that it's treatment. The main things that we want to hit on are making sure that we use this time and opportunity to really normalize talking about mental health when it comes to general women's health. I think a lot of time when people think about women's health, they think just obstetrics, or they think just gynecology. They think about something that you should never talk about because it is just super secret women, like female reproductive organ related things. And that's not necessarily the case. Women's health, women's mental health is a big cornerstone when it comes to women's health. And we really want to emphasize the fact that this is a safe space for us to be able to share this information with you. And of course, we would love any questions that you have. You can feel free to personally message any of us or the HerWill group, and we will get back to you.
Exactly. And within the context of women's health, talking about postpartum depression specifically, so depression that happens after delivering or right around the time of delivery, or even predating your delivery, so underlying depression that you might be going into a pregnancy with. So we'll be talking a little bit about that, obviously destigmatizing. There is nothing bad about this. This is very normal, and we should be constantly talking about it and supporting each other through it. Postpartum depression and postpartum blues, which Dr. Haq will talk a little bit about, are very common. Up to 50% of women can have postpartum blues, so it's almost abnormal to not have it. We'll talk about common signs and symptoms of postpartum depression, and really for you to be an advocate for postpartum depression, so you to feel more comfortable talking about it, not only with your female colleagues who are pregnant, but talk to your male colleagues, your brother, your uncle, your grandparents, your nephews about, hey, your family member is pregnant. These are the things you should do to help support her through that. And ultimately, the end goal is, why does it matter for us? I mean, I think I'm going to put this question out to all three of us, because we all have a personal reason why postpartum depression is important for us. And I can just go ahead and start since I'm talking. But why postpartum depression is important to me is, obviously I'm seeing postpartum patients all the time, taking care of pregnant women all the time. So it literally affects my work. Postpartum depression, when it's untreated, can result in poor outcomes for the child, poor outcomes for the family, and worst case scenario can end in maternal suicide or harm to the infant or family member. These aren't good outcomes, and they're totally avoidable if we can address the issue. And last but not least, on a personal level, as a Bangladeshi, I think we don't talk about this enough. We are a mother culture. The norm is, the mom delivers a child, and all of a sudden everyone's focus is on the baby, and everyone totally looks away to the mom, who's also a patient in this whole situation. She's just carried a 9-month pregnancy, has had tremendous fluctuations in her hormones, and is suddenly bearing the responsibility of this newborn and all this family surrounding her, and no one's looking at her. And that's terrible. We are ignoring her more so than we were when she was pregnant. And in their culture, there's a tendency for new moms to, come in, barge in and give opinions to her. Like, nah, or you're not doing this right, you're not doing that right. And that is not okay. That is not okay. It's only adding more salt to the wound. The mother is already feeling inadequate in taking care of this child. And, our intention to bhalo probably, but sometimes those cultural tendencies can do more harm than good. What about you, Dr. Hawk and Dr. Siddiqui? What are your personal reasons as to why postpartum depression is important?
Sure, I can go first. So postpartum depression is really significant. Well, first of all, I mean, I did 4 years of general obstetrics and gynecology, so we definitely took care of a lot of patients who did have both postpartum blues as well as postpartum depression. But I'm finding more that in my line of work right now, which is just pelvic surgery, that I'm seeing a lot of young patients who are coming to me 3 or 4 months after they've had their child. And we can talk about this at another date, but there's a lot of pelvic floor, so all of the muscles down in the pelvis that essentially get traumatized at the time of childbirth, as you can imagine. So a lot of those women end up having pelvic floor disorders that physicians like myself take care of in the future. So I'm seeing a lot of young women come to me. Actually, at our hospital, we started a peripartum clinic. So I'm seeing a lot of these women just in these next couple of days. And a lot of times the women who come in, they're young, they just had delivered 3 or 4 months prior. And the main issues they have are body image related. And then when we get to the meat of everything, I find that so many of them are just emotionally having such a difficult time coping with not just the hormonal changes, which I feel like so many women just come into our offices understanding that of course that's going to happen. But I think the things that disappoint my patients the most is how people in her surrounding treat her. So especially how her spouse or her partner treats her mentally and treats her postpartum body. And that's something that is really challenging. And it's interesting because I thought as a training in pelvic floor surgery, I won't ever have to really deal with patients who have, postpartum issues, but it's everywhere. And that's why this is such an important topic, because yes, it's part of women's health, but any doctor that has ever taken care of a young woman this should not be completely outlandish or foreign. So it's impacted me in a way that I didn't think it would. So I'm pleased to see that I at least recognize it.
Yeah. For me, I think that, it's so common, postpartum depression, that it is a public health issue. And yet there's kind of this notion that women are supposed to be kind of silent sufferers. And that's what's difficult to hear and to sit with, because it's that something like this, depression, during this period not only affects the mother, it affects the child, it affects the family, the community. And so seeing that communities are not supportive, are not able to discuss something that affects so many people, I think that's personally what's really hard for me to hear. and knowing that we can increase our voices and we can help during these situations. I think that that's what makes this even more important.
Totally. I totally agree.
Yeah.
So just kind of moving into postpartum depression, I think we all know that it's underdiagnosed and undertreated. So we need to always be on the lookout for this. What is the prevalence of postpartum depression? The definition, we don't really know. It varies from organization to organization in terms of the definition. But Dr. Hawk, what's kind of your standard go-to definition of postpartum depression?
So generally it's from the time of birth to up to 12 months. So within the first year, most common, it's more likely to happen within the first 5-6 months. And it can even start during the pregnancy. And like you said, it can start even before the pregnancy. And some of those are risk factors. But generally, we're looking at this time frame. So it can even be like within a 2-year time frame from before conception to 1 year after giving birth.
Okay, so that's interesting that you bring up the 12-month time period, because I guess I'm sort of just like, what is 12 months versus like 13 months? Like at 13 months, are you going to all of a sudden say that, you know what, your depression is not postpartum or baby related, it's, you know, you have other issues, I'm going to send you somewhere else. And I feel like, I don't know, I think that oftentimes women feel like, well, if I'm still feeling this bad this far out after having a baby, then there must be something else wrong. I can't just blame it on the baby. So what are your thoughts? Like, how do you talk to women in your community who like feel this way?
Yeah, I think the most, depression is hard because we can't really see it. It's hard to kind of like test for it in our blood. And so the way that someone thinks of like having a broken foot, you go see a doctor, you get it treated, and that's kind of like, that's it. And then with depression, it's like, what is this? Like, what am I looking at? Like, is it happening? Is it real? And then there's this idea of like, oh, like maybe it's my fault. Maybe I did something wrong. Maybe I should be better at being a mother. And so it's very important. I think the first thing I say is that no one is to blame here. It's an illness. It's a medical illness. It's an imbalance of chemicals in the brain. And it's important, like any other illness, to get it treated, to go see a professional, and to talk to people about it.
Yeah, and to add on to the 12-month definition, we have these definitions for the sake of having definitions, but it's always a gradient. I think I read a statistic that if you were to have postpartum depression, 54% of the time is within the first month after delivery. And then in the 2 to 4 months afterwards, 40% of postpartum depression cases come in. And then between 5 to 12 months, you get about the last remaining 6%. So it's a gradient. But the take home from that is, if postpartum depression is diagnosed, it's most likely to occur in the first 4 months. That's going to be the bulk of your diagnosis. Hospitalizations actually occur more often during the first 1 to 5 months after delivery, in relation to the 7 months after, because that's the vulnerable period for a woman. So take home for our viewers is, when a woman is postpartum, she's within that 4 to 5 month window, really keep a close eye on her. Dr. Hawk, I just want to talk to you about kind of example patients that I've had, and wanted you to sort of dissect and tell me what you think about them.
Sure.
So for example, from the top of my head, I can think of having a 21-year-old who I saw at our 6-week postpartum visit. She was delivered 6 weeks ago. She comes to my clinic. She's single. Her boyfriend left her in the middle of her pregnancy. Her pregnancy was complicated by gestational diabetes, and she also had mild blood pressures in her towards the end of her pregnancy. And then right now she's having difficulty breastfeeding. She's tearful, she's anxious, and she's asking me if this is normal. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, so this sounds like a very common case. I think some of the identifiers that you described about her are considered risk factors and kind of things to look out for when we're screening someone for postpartum depression. So age under 25 years old, single, not a lot of support from friends or family, and then, seeing her tearful, crying, it depends because, there's this idea of baby blues or postpartum blues that happens during the first 2 weeks after giving birth. And so during that period, you'll see someone feel sad, feel tired, not able to sleep properly. And a lot of those symptoms are common. We see that in 50 to even upwards of 80% of women after pregnancy. If you find that after that 3-week period, for 4 weeks, she starts saying that she doesn't feel herself, that she feels like she's not a good mother. She's always down on herself. She feels so overwhelmed. She's not enjoying parts of like taking care of the baby or even like going out, relaxing. She's not able to really function at her level. Then you start thinking about postpartum depression.
So kind of that 2-week mark is important for you, right? If it's within the first 2 weeks and mild symptoms, we contribute that to postpartum blues, which is very normal. And the difference is postpartum blues resolves on its own within 2 weeks, but postpartum depression persists.
And a caveat to that is if she has a history of depression at any time during her life, even a family history of depression, then we're actually thinking more of like, let's get to the front of this and let's start seeing how we can treat this, because it does significantly increase your risk of having postpartum depression.
Exactly. And to add on to the risk factors of the patient that I talked about, she also had complications like gestational diabetes, which is very common among Bangladeshi women, difficulty breastfeeding, which can be very common. So these things don't seem like they'd be related to postpartum depression, but they're actually associated with increased rates. So any sort of broad complication during pregnancy can contribute.
I wanted to just quickly ask Dr. Just go back to one of the things that Dr. Hawk you brought up, saying that if you notice that she's kind of not beyond the 2-week mark, hasn't really gotten back to her like baseline functional status. I find, and I'm sure that both of you will agree, I find that that is so difficult to be able to figure out. And I think that that's so hard for like our like Bangladeshi women, because there are 1,001 things that like a typical, I guess, Bangladeshi housewife is responsible for. And during pregnancy, whether it's a complication or even just general well-being during her pregnancy, is entirely her responsibility, as is every other thing that she's responsible for at home. And so I just wonder if you can help me figure out how to navigate these conversations, honestly, not even just as a physician, but just as a member of the community. Like, how can we talk about how to identify what is not function, what qualifies as not functioning at her baseline? Because I think I saw my mom growing up. She was a working professional, but I, without a doubt, believe she had postpartum depression. I mean, I've ruined her life. Like when I was little, I know that I was a terror child. So, I mean, if I didn't give her depression, I mean, she wasn't that now. So it's just, so I'm just wondering, like, how do we talk about this? Because
yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a really good point, that I think there are such high expectations of what women should be able to handle, are handling, in terms of having a newborn, taking care of the household, the family, even thinking about returning to work. There are just so many different factors in play, and it's an adjustment, so when something is an adjustment, then what is considered this kind of like this functionality that we're talking about? So I think that's a good question. And I think the best way to answer that is it's unique to the individual. So it's really about just asking them how they feel about how they're doing. If they feel like they're constantly failing, they're not able to keep up, then talking to them about what their expectations for themselves are. Where is this expectation coming from? Is it coming from them? Is it coming from others? Is it coming from what's expected of them? Because that's a very like intricate kind of interplay. And we find that, in talking to the family and talking to the friends, it's important to kind of come to a balance and middle ground that works for everyone.
Well said. Well
That's
said.
considered functional.
As providers, symptoms that we are specifically looking for, I mean, it's a variety, but, strong feelings of sadness, not being able to find pleasure or happiness in whatever activities they used to find pleasure or happiness in. Of course, anxiety, irritability, difficulty concentrating, fatigue, which are natural when you're taking care of a newborn. Obviously, thoughts of suicide or self-harm, these are huge red flags. So it's important to, if we hear that, that is someone who needs immediate assessment. But there can also be physical symptoms, increased heart rate, loss of appetite, stomach pain, headaches. These are all kind of secondary manifestations of postpartum depression. In terms, Dr. Hawk, in terms of dealing with women of Bangladeshi origin who might have additional higher expectations for themselves, as a friend, what are good ways to approach your friends? What are something that in our toolkit of how do you talk about this sensitive topic with a friend who just delivered?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the easiest ways to start a conversation is to ask them how they're doing. So open-ended questions. How are things? How are you feeling? What has this experience been like for you? And it's a lot of gathering information instead of giving information.
That's awesome. One thing that I found helps me, I talked to my mom about this because she's my first Bangladeshi connection who's had a pregnancy. Obviously, I'm here. And she's always telling me, Achol, this is real. Amar Dakna Achol. Achol, this is definitely real, some emotional differences after delivery and it's definitely a real phenomena and that it's normal. And just her telling me that makes me feel comfortable. So if you are someone who has gone through it, even if just postpartum blues, just to validate your friends or family symptoms, being like, I went through this, I felt like crap. You should not feel bad about this. I personally feel takes a weight off of my shoulders. Do you have any other suggestions, Dr. Siddiqui, from talking to your family or friends about how to best approach this?
Yeah, I honestly, I don't think I have really, and I don't think any one of us has like a cookie cutter response. The most that I've had to deal or I've addressed mental health issues in the peripartum period. A lot of it was actually on labor and delivery with my Bangladeshi patients, and I will say, I'll like openly admit, I don't think I handled them as well as I should have, but I was mainly trying to be as much of an advocate as I could for my patient, who is the woman in labor. For example, like one time I had a patient who really during labor was experiencing a lot of pain, young woman, like I think a 22, 23-year-old. She wanted the epidural for her labor, which is a very normal thing, and we've counseled her on how normal it is and that there aren't any complications really afterwards, but her husband didn't want it. And ekdom like openly shabar samne like labor room like jhagda, and it's just, I think because my colleagues knew that I was Bangladeshi, had me sort of intervene. And I sort of had to go in and stop the fight like a police officer. And I don't want to have to do that. And clearly that's not anybody's role. And also no woman should ever have to be in that situation where her partner, unfortunately, is not advocating for her. And I think one thing that came out of that, other than me being an excellent bodyguard at 5'0", is that I think that there is this understanding, especially among Bangladeshi women, that motherhood is intrinsically tied to some kind of painful experience. And if you don't experience that,
Yes.
Did you even have a child? Are you even a mother? And I think that that's really difficult to kind of wrap your head around, because it's a very like cultural experience that women have, women of our background have. And I find that it's difficult to really navigate those conversations, but at least starting with acknowledging before giving advice is a good place.
And to further take, there's this sense of how you're so ungrateful. You just had a healthy baby. You've done X, Y, and Z. Why are you being so ungrateful about this experience? Women don't have privilege, and that's not fair. That's
It is really unfair. And it's really hard for us to sit here and say, forget everything that you grew up with your culture, because we grew up in this kind of culture too, right? We understand this very well, which is why I think it's especially important for us, if we do have the opportunity to pull one of our sisters aside and just have that one-on-one conversation. I think that helps. Like, for example, in that situation where I was tasked to unfortunately kick the father of the baby out of the labor and delivery room, I had a chance to sit down with her and ask her exactly what she wants. What are her goals of care today? And that really—
and to add on to that, and really a question I want to ask Dr. Hawk for this one is, you mentioned the father of the baby, Dr. Siddiqui, and obviously in your clinical situation, he wasn't being an ally. But, I think Bangladeshi men are awesome. They're one of the most caring groups of men that we know. We always talk about it. So to Dr. Hawk, how do we engage the male partner and male family members in being an advocate for our moms?
Yeah, I certainly think that culture can play a significant role in this, because we do see that in the South Asian, the Bangladeshi community, that the numbers actually go even upwards of 20%, in terms of postpartum depression. So it's important to think about why. Why does it affect our community more? And to answer your question, how do partners become advocates and allies for their partners, for their wives? I think that in the culture there is this, and in talking to my own mother about it, there is this kind of idea that that men play a limited role when it comes to this whole process, and I think that's one of the biggest notions that we should try to reverse, because men can play a huge role in this. They can be champions, they can be supportive, they can talk to their partners, their wives, about what's going on, about how they're feeling, just as like a routine sort of check-in. Checking in is so important, seeing how the other person is doing, having an emotional connection, and experiencing the miraculous process of having a baby together. I think that brings people together, and I think it'll allow people to really support each other. So being kind of a supportive role like that, I think, is the most important, and I think it will challenge the notions of men kind of taking a step back and having the woman kind of bear the brunt and the pain of going through pregnancy.
That is so beautifully said. This just reminded me of the conversation I had with Mama and Abu, my parents, last night, in preparation for this talk. My parents both immigrated from Bangladesh. Abu was a PhD student when Mama had me. And talking to them, I could see both of them were engaging in the experience of having and taking care of me as a newborn. And Abu was always saying, I was always helping your mom. So like when we're talking about how can men be involved, he was helping cook, although his cooking wasn't very good. I heard a lot about that, but he cooked, at least he cooked. If I was crying and inconsolable, Abu would swoop in. Or small things in the morning, Mama would say, kaje jawar age, Abu would wake up and feed me or feed my brother, so that we would get an extra couple hours of sleep, so that Mama could get an extra couple hours of sleep. So tangible things to do to essentially take the load off of the mom is going to really help. And it also indicates to the mom that this is your child too. It's his baby too. Why wouldn't he do 50% of the load? Arguably even more, because the mom's also a patient in this scenario. Right. In the midst of this, as I'm talking to Mama and Abu, my brother and my husband are also in the room and listening. So what happened is, me bringing up this topic resulted in engaging 3 men in the room about what to expect and what to talk about. My little brother, he's choto, nowhere near having a child right now, but he at least heard that, and he sees that this is an issue. And when his time comes to hopefully, inshallah, one day have a child of his own, he's going to remember this conversation we had. And so it just starts from having a discussion and normalizing it. always talking about it with the men in our community. Dr. Siddiqui, do you have any thoughts as well?
I do actually, and I wanted to see what you guys think about this. I think there are some key phrases in Bangla that I think we as a community should try to avoid. And I think one thing, I mean, my father has gotten much better since then, but when we were younger, he definitely had a hard time, especially when my siblings were young and they were babies. He had a hard time understanding what his role would be. And one thing, and it's definitely not unique to my father, I think it happens a lot in our community, is saying things like "Tomar me ghumay na," "Tomar chele erkom." It's a lot of, and especially when like a young mom's like baby is crying, it's like "Ami parbo na, tomar chele like খায় না." And I think this whole like relinquishing responsibility of being the parent for the child, I think allows people to sort of like absolve themselves of any ways in which they're contributing to the problem. And I think that that's something that we should try to collectively avoid. And there are so many other things, like I know like bacha ke buked dudh khawa is a very big thing, but not all women have the capability to do that, and to not shame her for being able to or not being able to do that. Or if a woman is breastfeeding her child longer than she should, I've definitely heard a lot of those stories too. If it's okay with her doctor, then we should assume that it's also okay for her socioculturally to do it too. And I think that these are the things, it's not these like big things, it's these like little microaggressions that I think Bangladeshi women face all the time, especially at the time that they have children, that really like end up compounding. And at the end, like when something unfortunately like like catastrophic happens, like the people in their surroundings are just left feeling like, oh, I never said anything bad. I just jokingly said Tomar Chile doesn't do this, or I just jokingly said this, but it's not, I mean, yeah, maybe at the time it was a joke, but everything adds on. So I think it's like important for us to remember that. And this is not something that like just any doctor will remember to ask their patients. I ask my patients when something like this happens because I understand, because I think we just have we are uniquely positioned to understand this. But you guys are both nodding your heads because you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah. I mean, you know, when you say the word microaggression, the first thing I think of is that words really can hurt. So being careful about what we say and the way we say it, and also taking ownership for the things that we say and saying, okay, that was a mistake. I'm sorry that hurt you. That was not my intention. Because sometimes they may not have any realization or clue that that can be something hurtful. So it's very important to be be an ally throughout this, because this is one of the most naturally stressful times that any relationship, any couple, any family is going to be growing through. So it's really important to be supporting each other through this and to be open to feedback about, okay, how can I do this better? How can I support you better?
Exactly. And for women who are seeking that help, to not feel like you are somehow a worse off mom by asking for that help. If someone says, no, you need to sleep right now, I'm going to take care of the baby, take it. That does not make you a weaker mom. And if anything, indicates that you are a mom who has the insight into knowing what you can do best for your child. If you get an extra couple of hours of sleep, you're going to be a better mom, and you are doing the right thing by taking advantage of that.
Yeah. Or ask for it too. If it's not openly, if people are not offering, openly say exactly what you need. I mean, even if it's something like, oh, the fish that I'm frying, can you like bhaja machtaকে উল্টিয়ে দাও? Can you just do that for me? I think it's just little things that can go so far. Openly.
Yeah. Or just saying, I need to go home and eat mama's halka like patla jholer murgi mangsho tarkari. Like if you're craving that, go do it. There is nothing wrong with that. We are 100% supporters of that. Dr. Hawk, you're going to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to say this is one of the things that I'm learning about myself as a Bangladeshi woman, is that for some reason, sometimes I notice I hesitate to speak up and I hesitate to ask for help. And so it's so important to just kind of catch yourself and think like, wait, this is something that's important to me. This is something that would really help me. I have the voice to ask for that.
And sometimes that comes from just asking your girlfriends. Like, if you're feeling stressed about this, talk to one of us. And just to hear from our friend saying, no, you can definitely ask for that, or that's what I did. It helps. It validates your feelings. And so reach out to the people that are going to be part of your tribe. So Dr. Hawk, going back to this pregnant patient, let's say she's just not getting better. She's tearful. She's upset. She's having some dangerous thoughts. Her husband, who has now heard her talk, is aware of this and brings her to her OBGYN. What are the next steps that we should be doing?
Yeah, so the first thing would be to hear her experience and her account of what's been going on. I think something that can be very useful and helpful to the physician-patient relationship is to talk to them alone, even because sometimes they might be shy or embarrassed to say certain things that they're thinking or feeling in front of their husband, because there can be a shame, like, oh, like I shouldn't be feeling this way, or I shouldn't be thinking about having these thoughts about myself or about my baby. So it's really important to create an environment where they feel comfortable talking about whatever. And I think the other notion of that is to kind of make it clear to them that we are here to help them. I think a lot of women, and especially women in minority communities, including Bangladeshi women who live abroad, there's this fear that if they say something wrong, that maybe they'll get taken away, or their child will get taken away from them. And that's kind of one of the last things in terms of a system and a community that we want for a family. So, it's okay to feel like, oh, I can't do this. This is too much for me. I can't handle this. It's okay to feel overwhelmed, and it's okay to share that with your doctors. We are going to do what's best for you and your family, and we're going to do our best to keep you guys together and to keep everyone safe. That is our main priority, safety. And so kind of create an environment where you can convey that to your patients, convey that to people, is very important, because they're very scared. They're scared to speak up.
Exactly. And so let's say I'm a patient and I hear this from you, and I've told you everything that I've been feeling, and you think that I'm a good candidate for medication. What medications could a patient be started on, and what other risks and benefits associated?
Mm-hmm. So when it comes to treating depression, it's about decreasing risk, because this is a very risky situation, risky time for the mother and the infant. And so we want to, again, keep everyone as safe as possible. Untreated depression is very, very unhealthy, very unrisky, can have debilitating effects on the mother and the child. And so that's why we advocate for treatment. And there are different types of treatment. There is treatment that's not medication, non-pharmacological, and there's treatment with medications. So in terms of non-pharmacological treatment, there's different types of therapy, and studies show that that is very helpful and can be very helpful in providing support in that kind of emotional attunement that women need during this very stressful time. And then, like you mentioned, there are a wide array of medications. The most common medications are antidepressants. And so they are Prozac, Lexapro. You guys might be familiar with some of these words. Not you, obviously, because you're doctors, but the general audience. And so when we look at medications, there are a lot. These are the most studied medications, and we look at how much of this medication can be found in the breast milk, because I know that that's a concern for parents. Like, how will this affect my child? And we find that there's a very, very small amount that does leak into the breast milk, but that it can be very easily metabolized by the child. And so we find that in terms of long-term studies, short-term studies, that there is no effect on the child that is dangerous. However, what is dangerous is if someone does have moderate to severe depression and they're left untreated, that is actually worse for the child and the baby, because it impairs the bonding. When a mother is so down, so depressed, so anxious that they're not able to emotionally connect with the child, it can be very detrimental, because these are the years that the baby is developing their emotional and their physical growth.
Yeah, I'm really glad that Dr. Huck, you brought that up. Essentially, what you're saying is that, yes, of course, with any medication, there's always some sort of side effect profile. But what is way worse is the untreated underlying condition than the consequences that you'd have from the side effects of the medication itself. I think that's so important, because I think there's just this general idea that especially amongst in our community, that pregnancy is a very natural thing for women to go through. They should not be taking any medication during this time, because that will like hurt the baby. I'm very rarely do I hear not taking taking medication will hurt you, but it's almost taking any kind of medication will hurt your baby. So many times, a lot of the pregnant patients we've had, we find that they like just self-discontinued their antidepressants during pregnancy. And it's very jarring, because almost every time I tell them, no, keep taking it, even though, I'm not a psychiatrist, but I definitely know that if you are on this medicine and there's no like direct like issue with the baby, then it is there to help you. The worst, I think, prenatal, so to speak, depression I've seen is a woman who it was so sad that she was completely untreated. She was just not treated, had multiple suicide attempts during her pregnancy, and then when she delivered the baby, she didn't want to hold the baby. The fact that like she literally just could not identify with this being that she just gave birth to. It's so sad. So I'm really glad that you said that. People are so like scared of pregnancy, and honestly, it's not just in the general public, even in medicine too. I don't know if you've experienced this, Dr. Hussein, but so many times I get patients whose primary care doctors told them to stop the antidepressants that they're taking during pregnancy. And it sounds outrageous to me, but clearly there's something circulating in our communities that tells people to do this. But thank you.
Both of you are highlighting the fact that this is really a case by case basis, and it's up to you as the patient to make that decision. There are, to say that SSRIs or the antidepressants are totally free of risk. Honestly, it just hasn't been well studied among pregnant women, because pregnant women are a vulnerable population. So we're not going to go experimenting on them. So if you think that your symptoms can be well managed with family support, you've taken time off of work, you're going to do X, Y, and Z, and you want to try that, we are going to be there for you to support you through that. But if you are also someone who's like, I'm a little worried that I'm going to become suicidal or start doing things that will prevent me from bonding with my child, and you want to start it, we are there to support you through that as well.
I think for women, that's like really hard. This whole idea of bonding with your child is really just, am I feeding my child? Am I clothing my child? Do I have shelter? And I think it's really important that we emphasize like what bonding means with your child. The whole idea of like asking a mom, when you look at your child, how do you feel? Honestly, I've never done that. And I think this discussion is making me want to do that more, not just with my patients, but with my like family members.
And also to add on to that feeling of when you look at your child and you're not feeling that emotional response, and then for people to say, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
Can you imagine how terrible that is to hear as a mother when you're not feeling a bond and then you are being punished for it and you feel extra guilty for it? And how do you expect someone to go up and tell someone, or what's the word? Actually state that they feel that way if they're going to be punished for feeling that way, to confess that. So we really need to be on high alert and be open to talking about these things. So I definitely agree with Dr. Siddiqui.
It's also important to keep in mind that I think there's this like fantasized notion of this like perfect magical bond that when you look into your baby's eyes, like you just like see heaven. The truth is that it's like life. There are so many feelings involved with having a child. And one of those feelings is fear of what's going to happen, fear of the unknown. And I think that's where we and patients are not sure when it comes to medications, because there's this fear of, if I take this, what could happen? And I think what you mentioned about a lot of primary care doctors, there are even psychiatrists who don't have the training in postpartum depression, who are uncomfortable with treating pregnant patients because they're afraid of something. And I think one of the sad parts about that is not doing something, it can be even more catastrophic. But yeah, having the bond with a child is very unique to an individual. And so sometimes it could be like, oh my God, this child kept me up all night, I'm so annoyed. And that's perfectly normal.
Yeah, that's very important. I'm glad both of you mentioned that. Dr. Hawk, can you talk about some of the atypical psychiatric conditions that can come postpartum? So we talked about postpartum blues, we talked about postpartum depression, but can you talk a little bit about postpartum psychosis?
Yes, that is important to mention, because it's another thing that we as a community and we as healthcare professionals should be on the lookout for. Postpartum psychosis is quite rare. If you think about postpartum depression happening in 10% of the population, about 10% of women experiencing postpartum depression can have postpartum psychosis. So that's, you would see kind of someone, you notice that they're starting to get paranoid, or they're starting to get suspicious. Their moods are fluctuating rapidly. They're not able to really speak or even think coherently. They seem, again, it's kind of that idea of, they seem like they're not able to function at their baseline, but it's so much worse in a sense, because they might start seeing things, they might start hearing things, and they might be afraid to talk about that. The reason why it's very important to pick this up is because that is even a bigger risk factor for harm to the mother or harm to the child. So it's important to get them immediate medical attention.
Perfect. Yeah, it's extremely rare, but really bad outcomes. So we should always think about that as well. Dr. Siddiqui, do you have, and actually to both of you, Dr. Siddiqui, Dr. Hawk, I feel that we are kind of nearing the end of our discussion. Any parting words and thoughts for our viewers?
Actually, if we can just go back to the topic of psychosis that you just mentioned. I'm sorry, I feel like a lot of these things are just reminding me of like some of the idiosyncrasies of just general Bangladeshis. My mother is a psychiatrist, so she understands a lot of, like, obviously she takes care of a lot of the issues that we are bringing up today. But she once told me this story about how in her hometown, there's a young woman who had a baby, and of course her postpartum depression symptoms were totally like not seen, because they were seen in the context of her just not being a responsible mother. But then she started to have like psychotic episodes, and unfortunately, and this is so obviously frustrating for us to hear, but unfortunately everybody just convinced her that jine dhorlo, seriously, that she started hallucinating, and people were like, no, it's the jinn. And so she never ended up getting really any treatment and was just committed. And that just made her psychotic disorder much, much worse. But there are still members of the community today who is just like, that's a lost case. She just got possessed. And I know, it sounds ridiculous to say out loud, but this is a very real thing. So hallucination, I can only imagine. If you can't talk about just depressive symptoms, I wonder how a woman can ever vocalize having hallucinations in our community. I think that would be really challenging, but
yeah, that's heartbreaking. I've also heard stories similar to that in my community, and just hearing people, it taking like upwards of like 3 years for people to finally get help. And some of that comes from like when you're not able to explain something that's happening, and when you have no idea what this concept of postpartum psychosis could be, then you think of, what you do remember and what you're familiar with. So I think that's why it's even more important spreading the word, so that people can think, oh, I know I've heard of this before. Maybe I should have them see a doctor.
Exactly. And instead of just dismissing that person as, oh, she's faggot, gone case, and just sort of stigmatizing her and alienating her from the community. This is a pathology. It is a disease. It's like if we wouldn't think anything different if she had uncontrolled blood sugars, we should not treat her any differently if she's having uncontrolled emotional symptoms, or psychiatric symptoms. Yeah, I think this was really helpful. I learned a lot from talking to you guys. Thank you, Dr. Hawk.
Thanks so much, Dr. Hawk. I mean, I feel like I'm just sort of reevaluating all of the different ways I've handled conditions like this, and I'm hoping to take these steps forward. This is great.
Yeah, what are some take homes for you guys?
Yeah, I was going to say it's a work in progress for all of us trying to figure out how we can support each other. I think the series that you guys have here is amazing. So keep up the good work.
Thank you. Thank you. I learned a lot. I think I'm very energized just as a human, not even as a physician, to kind of bring it up. I do know of a couple of women who are pregnant right now, and just to bring it up and just be like, hey, I'm just going to ask you how you're doing afterwards, and make sure everyone in your family knows. And do you have a support system? Who's coming to take care of you when you deliver the baby? Are your parents coming over? Are you planning to go somewhere? I know with this pandemic, it's introduced some difficult scenarios for our postpartum women. So we have to be extra diligent about that. Is your husband supportive? Does he seem like is he taking time off? Are you taking time off of work? How can I help? Can I order some food for her? Can I cook something for her so she has meals for the week after she's delivered? Dr. Siddiqui, you wanted to talk a little bit about body image issues, things, how does that affect a woman after she delivers?
Yeah, absolutely. I think mainly because of the work that I do now, it's very surgical. So a lot of my the procedures that I do are exclusively from the exams that I perform on my patients. A lot of times these younger moms who come to me with these really body image concerns at 3 to 4 months out of in the postpartum period, almost all of them unfortunately have undiagnosed depression. And the way that this is being manifested is not that they're coming to my office to talk about their depression symptoms. They're coming to my office to talk about if I can surgically fix what they feel is wrong with their pelvic floor. And I mean, of course, as a surgeon, I would love to do that, but I think what I need to remind myself is that there's a reason why she feels this way. Anatomically, she looks completely fine, normal, and healthy, but why is she so convinced that something is wrong with her down there? And I think it just ties back to the fact that there is a lot of pelvic floor trauma at the time of delivery, and women come out of it feeling like they're broken. And they feel that going to maybe a surgeon will help fix that, but it's not necessarily a surgical fix. A lot of times it's of course on us as providers to recognize this, but also us as peers for our Bangladeshi sisters and daughters to realize that if one is having body image issues that are so severe after pregnancy, it could be because of underlying mental health concerns. I think I see this a lot also in Bangladeshi women who have C-sections, because I think in our community, a lot of times having a C-section makes a mom feel like she's failed just before she's even become a mom, because natural delivery or normal vaginal delivery is so tied to being a mother. So I think this definitely comes up a lot. And it's obviously never talked about because we talk about all of these other things that are important after one has a baby, like the baby, and all of these other societal things. So I think that.
To add on to that, the C-section equates to failure. If anything, it's the opposite for me, because I have now endured tremendous large complicated abdominal surgery, and they have to take care of a child. So if anything, you have earned a badge of honor if you've endured a C-section. And we don't do C-sections unless it's indicated. So you as a mother electing for the more painful route, another more painful, more dangerous route of delivery to save yourself and your child is noble. You did the right thing. So it's as an obstetrician, it just makes no sense why our culture thinks that way, but absolutely wrong. And to just sort of add on to what you said, Dr. Siddiqui, even though women are anatomically similar to postpartum, there are actual differences that happen after delivery. And, you know, even if you feel bad about that, it doesn't mean you are mentally ill. It means that you, as all of us, our bodies are not going to be the same after delivery. And it depends on person to person. You're going to have stretch marks. You might have scars from surgery. You might have a large enough laceration from your vaginal delivery that might have debilitating effects on how you have bowel movements or difficulty urinating. You might have prolapse down the line. These are real changes that happen, and your body might never be the same. And
Right.
also women on that.
Yeah, totally. And that's, I mean, the bulk of my counseling every day. I think just reminding women that just because they've experienced like some alterations to their bodies that may or may not be permanent, does not undervalue them, just to remember that. And I think a lot of times, especially, and we can touch on this another time too, but a lot of women after they have like a regular normal vaginal delivery, when it comes to being able to have intercourse with their partner in the future, they feel so insecure, they feel so terrible about themselves. And in many, and obviously this is not in every situation, but in many situations their partners are not supportive, and if anything are accusatory. So this is also extremely important and something that I see all the time. And yeah, it's really paramount to remind ourselves to do our due diligence and letting women know that, yeah, you went through a big thing. Good job, congratulations. And even if like things don't go back to the 19-year-old body that you had in the past, that is okay.
Okay. And it's just a matter of having those expectations. If you expect it, partners and the patient expects it, it might help transition to that stage a little easier.
Yeah,
and adding on to that, in terms of changes with body breastfeeding, the expectation to breastfeed or the inability to breastfeed, both of them can be really stressful for a woman. So support her in whatever decision she does. I mean, I can tell myself, I can speak on myself, I was not a breastfed baby, and I think I turned out okay. So if you cannot breastfeed your child for whatever reason, if you literally can't, don't want to, whatever, I think your child's gonna be fine.
I think when it comes to a lot of these topics, especially in the Bangladeshi community, it could be a bit taboo, talking about sex, talking about your sex life, talking about breastfeeding. And I think that's kind of why, why men are not able to provide that support or understand, you know, why is there sexual frustration, sexual difficulty, is there pain happening there? So again, to be able to talk about this stuff more, I think it'll create a better platform. And then something I wanted to bring up was this, you were talking about I'm blanking, about fear when it comes to, I'm blanking, I'm sorry, I lost.
Well, maybe fear when it comes to, you know, being able to take care of the child. And one thing we do want to highlight, especially for our listeners on HerWill, if you are working and your fears about returning to work and negotiating, am I a good mom by going back to work, or does it make me a terrible mom by going back to work? And can I do both at the same time? And the pressures that are associated with that. I don't know if that's something that you were thinking of.
Right. And I just remembered, so there's this idea of like, when it comes to like body image issues and like why we often find ourselves focusing more on the physical aspects, like, oh, there's something wrong with my heart when you're having palpitations, when your heart is racing fast. So another thing is, especially in the Bangladeshi community, is this idea of having words, the right words to talk about our feelings. Talking about our feelings can be scary. So that's why we sometimes tend to focus more on the things that we can see and the things that we can think that we can fix with surgeries and whatnot. So that's why having more of a vocabulary and being able to say, oh, I'm afraid, or I'm anxious, I'm nervous, it's very important.
Inadequate. Exactly.
Thanks for that. That's important.
That's a really good way to articulate that concept. Great. Well, I think we've talked a lot about how we can lift one another up. We've given our listeners a toolkit to educate the men, to educate ourselves, and to educate our pregnant women who are thinking about getting pregnant. We talked about breastfeeding, body image, postpartum depression, blues, postpartum psychosis. We've got a pretty good coverage of issues here. Thank you so much, guys. This is really, really helpful.
interesting because I also feel like we can do this all day. There's just
Go on and on.
I hear you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hawk, again, for donating your time and giving us your expertise on psychiatry to help articulate some of these really difficult and sensitive topics. Obviously, Dr. Siddiqui, my partner in crime, for being supportive and talking about all these OBGYN talks, and then also to HerWill for giving us their time, their dedication to highlighting these important issues for our listeners. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Well, do you guys have any fun plans for the rest of the day?
I'm actually going to try to make some dal. It's hard. Dal is hard. You have to get the right consistency. To dua durud pore, I make dal.
Dal is underrated, right?
Dal is, I think if I was ever going, I don't know why I'm thinking this, but if I was ever in prison and somebody asked me, what do you want for your last meal? I would say dal bhat, like hadye.
Oh, for me, it would be tehari with salad. Oh, dal tehari. Oh my God.
Bring a tehari in jail.
I think for me it would be gormangshun pat.
Oh yeah. I don't think they're gonna know how to make it. That's the sad part. Jails in America don't know how to make tehari. But here's my dream. My dream is for all hospitals to have dal as on their postpartum.
Why not? Dal is so good. It's just protein. That is so much better than some of the terrible things that I see on my postpartum patients.
I know.
It's so nutritional and so filling.
Emotionally fulfilling. Like, it is so good.
Well, I am sending you good thoughts for this dal. Send me a picture when you're done, okay? Give me a taste test.
All right,
ladies. Well, have a good day. Take care. Bye.
Bye.